Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Nancy Drew. A great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, let's start off with the fact is, obviously, everyone's still working through every remedy that, George's family knows trying to help Nancy, but none of them are ultimately working. So obviously, working with Hannah, they're trying to figure out, okay, so to be able to understand how to get rid of that wraith, you have to understand kind of where it was born. Like, they basically have to find an echo of the past of where it was born and understand its circumstances, and that might give them a clue on how to, finally deal with it. So, because obviously everyone's worried about, things kind of going badly, but everyone's trying to keep their hopes up. It's like, we're going to save Nancy, don't give up, because obviously the markings on her are getting worse to the point they don't even need the camera to see them anymore. Like, they're super visible and they're getting worse and worse. Obviously for Ryan, he's kind of stressing out right now, because for one, he doesn't have the money necessarily to bury Celia, but at the same time, his daughter's on knocking towards death, but he's trying to keep his hopes up. And it's because for him it's despite everything, it's Nancy is the only family he's got left. Great, he's fine without his dad, but it's still that's the only family he's got left, because he's dead to his father now. And I'm sure he can live without that, but it's right, he doesn't even have his mom anymore. So it is kind of a sad thing, because, and it doesn't come up in the episode, but I'm sure seeing Nancy like that bothers Carson on many levels, because it probably makes him think of when he kind of had to sadly sit back and watch Kate die. It doesn't come up in the episode, but I think that probably impacts him even more of no, we're going to save you, because I'm not about to lose another woman in my life that I love, type of situation. So, but obviously for Nancy, it's you want to do something for me, don't hover, be there for Ryan. He kind of needs a dad right now, because it's you're kind of, you're a great dad, and he obviously didn't have the greatest dad growing up, so having you to kind of look after him right now is kind of the best thing you can do for me. So obviously Gil shows up and he's yo, what's up, and everything, what's wrong? And obviously he's saying oh, we don't need them, they're making things first and foremost, I'm who the hell are you to come in and be oh, you don't need them? It's what are you talking about? That, to me, that's idiotic, because it's oh, you're an expert on the supernatural? Buddy. They've been dealing with the supernatural since last season. You only popped up in the story this season after all the ghosts and things that they've dealt with, all the challenges that have come their way, and they've been able to do it together. And obviously for Nancy, it's the moment he's trying to pull her away, no, come on. They're making things worse. And then all of a sudden the markings on her get worse. She's no, you, the wraith has made me blind to who you are. I've just, because, to be fair, because that's why I was it did seem weird that she kind of I guess everyone kind of has their bad boy phase or something, but it's just interesting, going from Nick to Owen to obviously there being something between her and Ace to killed, and I'm it didn't track, and everyone, even Ace was you shouldn't date him, he's not a good dude, he's kind of a bad influence. But it is a thing of right, he's not the best influence, because he doesn't always try, I guess he's trying, but he doesn't always do the right thing. He has to kind of be pushed to kind of do the right thing, but it's the Wraith kind of needed him around, because he was kind of a negative influence, and it's kind of it led her astray multiple times. But for her, it's yeah, it didn't let me see you for who you were. And it's he's you're breaking up with me now? You'll come to regret this. It's really, dude? You're saying that? It's you should be I understand. Just give me a chance, Nancy, or blah, blah, blah. But you have said, you're going to regret this. It's the lady's dying, and you're telling her she's going to regret breaking up with you. Smooth moves, bro. Then I'm once again, I'm also biased, because I want Ace and Nancy together, But also, once again, we've seen time and time again, Gil could kind of be a D-bag, so that's all, that doesn't help his case. If he was a straight up nice dude, if it was kind of a alternate reality where it's kind of we're picking between Nick and Ace, you're oh, don't make me choose, because granted, we don't live in that reality, but it's still just kind of a thing of you can tell he's definitely he played the reason why the Wraith wanted her around him is because he also tugs at the darker side that Nancy's kind of been dealing with, which we'll kind of talk about that later. So, but obviously Ace wants to kind of spend time with Nancy, but then he's calling up Amanda, and Amanda's hey, I gotta be here for my bro. It's even he's baffled, wait, but you said he was he's a bad influence on Nancy, because she's she broke up with him for no reason. It's well, he's a bad influence. You said that. She's you can't talk about him like that. It's that sibling thing of especially being twins. It's it's like, no. Like, it's kind of like a, no, you don't get to talk about my twin like that. Only I get to talk about my twin like that. I mean, that just applies to siblings in general. But then she also kind of did a low blow where she was like, yes, spoken like an only child. And he's like, ooh, okay. You know, I just recently met my half brother and I don't get to spend any time with him because of the circumstances and everything. So that was kind of jacked up for her sake, because even he was like, yeah, nice time for a hit, because at the same time, like, he's working on the computer, because they ended up going into woods, and during the ritual they ended up finding out how the wraith ended up being, and it was Temperance Hudson, her ancestor, was a part of the women in white, but the women in white turned against her, and I was like, why is that? I wonder why didn't the wraith thing work out the way she wanted it to. Like, I guess it's because well, to be fair, they kind of had cut her off from, like, her power, I guess, so she wasn't as powerful, and so the ritual didn't work out the way she wanted to. But we do get the answer later on, because the meeting, I was like, why did the women in white turn against her? It's more so like, well, it's because apparently, and you can tell this was like, oh, they're setting up something, that basically she wanted to tap into something that's deep, dark, and evil that's buried underneath Horseshoe Bay, which kind of explains all the supernatural stuff. It's kind of like, the reference I always go to is like Teen Wolf, the TV show, Beacon Hill. Beacon Hill got its name because it's literally a beacon for the supernatural. Like, a lot of people don't know why they're drawn there, but it's like, oh, because you have some ties to the supernatural, and it's like, it's tugging at the supernatural in you. So I think that's kind of like what Horseshoe Bay is. It's a magnet for the supernatural. Like, long before, like, Nancy released the supernatural stuff, trying to, like, save George, like, obviously there was lots and lots of supernatural stuff already happening here in Horseshoe Bay. Obviously it has deep supernatural and magical roots, so it comes as no surprise. Like, this has been happening forever. It's just now everyone's eyes are open, at least the core group's eyes are open to all the supernatural stuff going down in Horseshoe Bay. So I just think that was kind of fascinating. And it also seems like, oh, the women in white killed her. I was like, oh, fascinating. But basically they learned that the device is being held by someone, because I love that, like, after the ritual and everything, and they saw everything, and because Nancy was like, that's why the wraith was drawn to me, because I'm a Hudson, and it felt a connection with its creator. That's why it latched on to me in particular. That's also another thing, too. Nancy wouldn't have been in this whole circumstance with the wraith if it wasn't for Gil, Like, that's how she came across the wraith in the first place, was saving Gil's hide and everything. So it's kind of like, it's like, that's kind of a little bit of a strike against you, buddy. But it's like, hey, we all make mistakes. So, like, once again, it's just like, if he wasn't such a D-bag sometimes, you'd be like, because, like, you see that Gil, his upbringing kind of messed him up, which actually kind of makes him, like, there's correlations between him and Nancy in that regard, and maybe there is some kind of connection there through that, but it's just kind of like, if it wasn't such a D-bag sometimes, like, the way he treated Amanda on more than one occasion, just the way he's trying to, like, he's like, oh, you don't need them. It's like, these are her friends. She knew them before she knew you. Like, and that's also a D-bag boyfriend thing to do. Like, you don't need your friends, like, separating someone. It's like, oh, I want you to need me and only me. That's a very, like, self-centered thing to do. Like, there are boyfriends who do that. It's like, I want you to have any friends. I want you to have me and me alone. It's like, but, like, because he's making it seem like her friends were against her, like, all they want, it's like, they're doing literally everything to save her, and what would you have done? Like, I mean, legitimately, what would he have done, Like, I know I'm ragging on him so much, but it's just, like, it baffles me. I'm like, what would you have done, Gil? You're not an expert in supernatural. I'm sorry, I'm circling back into harping, and this might be called a quote-unquote rant, whatever. It's all in fun, because I'm just like, I legitimately don't know what Gil thought he could necessarily do, what he had planned. I think he had nothing planned, regardless. But circling back to my point, like, obviously they found out about the device and everything, and I love that, like, H drew a very crude drawing of, like, Nancy's like, oh, it's a fish. She's like, no, it's the vial her tears went in. And then, like, you have Nick putting out his sketch of the device, and just Ace looking at him like, show off? Like, why'd you have to, like, one-up me like that? I love it. But basically cross-referencing it, they ended up finding out there's a Myrtle Hudson, which is interesting because I guess it's like we've only been dealing with, like, the main branch of the Hudson family. There's Hudsons all over the place, so I thought that was kind of fascinating. So obviously they take the road trip to New York to kind of get to her, and so it's like, right, she does, like, weddings and stuff like that. So obviously it's like, right, we got to pretend like like, you know, Nick's like, oh, let's get married. And like, obviously, like, George was like, I'm a terrible actress, which I always think stuff like that's funny. It's like, oh, that's funny because you're actually an actress and you're a really good actress. So it's like, you know, I always think that's funny. But the fact is that it's like Odette takes over and like her and Bess, you know, pretend to be a couple and everything, while the others try and sneak and find the device, which they ultimately do. But then like they kind of reveal everything to Myrtle, which I guess that should have been a sign because like Myrtle took that like with the. I mean, to be fair, it's like, oh, we showed you this picture. Like her, I would have assumed her disbelief would have kicked in, but it's like I guess that's kind of the whole point. We'll get to it later, but it's like, nah, they're going to help Nancy. Basically, they're going to reverse the whole thing, the ritual that gave birth to the Wraith, and they're going to try and separate it from Nancy. But ultimately, the Wraith was too strong, and it seemed like it was killing Nancy. And honestly, I love the trial she went through, because I thought that was actually a pretty dope aspect of the episode, because it is her confronting a lot, like why the Wraith was able to kind of latch onto her because of her vulnerabilities. Like the first thing she came across, it's like she's like, "Oh, this is me, not you." At first, I was like, "Is this supposed to be like Nancy Hudson, like who she was supposed to be to a certain extent, or something like that?" It's like for her, it's like it's a representation of her darkest moment. That was her kidnapping Everett and was willing to do anything to get a confession out of him, like. Because after, like, Celia died and she was just pissed about everything, like, he's gotten away with everything, so she was going to do whatever it took to take him down, so that was kind of her darkest moment. But who did she, you know, it's like, George, how'd you get here? It's like, you needed someone to defend you, and, you know, you chose to manifest me, which I'm like, yeah, because she's like, I need a badass to help me. Who is it going to be? Oh, George, of course. But I love that each trial she didn't have to go through alone. Like, obviously, it's like, people that she care about, her friends, are there manifested to kind of help her through. And so basically she has to follow like the cord to the depths of like, because that's where the Wraith is hiding, but basically it's hiding underneath a lot of her pain and trauma. So obviously like her regrets and the trauma of like, right, I became that person in my darkest moment. Then the next moment was about, oh, like her younger self. She's like, we were good, we were getting good grades, we solved cases. How do we turn into you? And it's like, you know, Bess was there. It's like, figure out, like, you're not just going to be able to get past her. You can't just, like, run away from her. Find out why she's here. And it's like, she's me when I first started doing cases. The me that took on my first case. And it's like, why did you take on that case? And for her, it's like, because on some level, I was looking for the truth. The truth was so important, like, that you were willing to kind of throw away your perfect life and everything. But for what? And it's like, and then she was like, on some level, I knew, like, I was seeking out the truth in my own life, and so it manifested as me, like, being someone who's all about the truth. And that's so interesting to understand, like, the psychology behind, like, why Nancy is so, like, why the truth is so important, why she goes after it so hard, like, it kind of puts everything behind it, because she didn't have the truth in her own life. Because I'm like, right, she watched her parents bury that box in the yard, and she knew, like, she, you know, kids latch on to certain things, so it's always been there in the back of her mind. My parents are lying to me. Growing up, she always knew, like, my parents are lying about something. She didn't know what it was, but on some level, she knew there was some lie that her parents were keeping. So that's what it was. Like, she's kind of down this path because of that, like, you know, the kind of scars, you know, more metaphorical that came with it. Then it was like, you know, she was in a deep grave, and it's like, it was the version of her that had lost her mom, and Nick was there. She's like, I need your help. He's like, you kind of have to do this on your own. Because for her, it was, she was like, there was a moment in time. This is the moment I thought after my mom died that I'd never be okay again. But then, like, he was like, but you were okay. You found a way to be okay. And she's like, yeah, you helped in a lot in that way, but the moment you kind of chose George, it kind of made her backpedal a little bit, because like her kind of like the light at the end of that dark tunnel, like of losing her mom, was him. But when things kind of didn't work out, and now it's like you're with George, like, you know, she didn't show it too much, but there were moments you were like, oh, you could tell like she was kind of bothered. Like even before they even became a couple, they had moments that Nancy was definitely catching wind of, like, so she knew on some level until like they kind of made it kind of more official and everything. But at the end of the day, she crawls out, and it's like, regardless of anything, thank you for still being my friend. Like, they might not be together, but he's still an important part of her life, and he's there for her. Then the next step, she's like, I don't even remember this, but it was like the day she was born. And she's like, right, I was born broken. And Nate's like, no, you weren't born broken. Hurt, yes, but turn that hurt into love, you know? because obviously a lot of pain was born that day, because it's like your biological mom died. Kate and Carson had to lie in order to raise you, which, you know, comes with its own issues. And obviously, like, you've had to, you know, because obviously this entire season, and obviously for a while now, Nancy's been struggling with her identity. And, you know, and I think that was just kind of an interesting aspect of it. She's like holding her younger self, you know, because despite all that pain, something great was born out of it. Like, she was born out of love. Also, kind of another angle to it. It's like, right, Ryan didn't even know I existed. So there's a lot of trauma that was kind of created that day that's kind of been bubbling beneath the surface. But she hands, it's like, will you hold me? He's like, I thought you never asked. And then in that moment, they kind of get close, and she's like, and like, it's like, oh, are they about to kiss? And Ace is like, knock him dead. And she goes deeper, and she basically has to cut the connection that basically the Wraith has been feeding on her trauma and everything. And it's like, all right, cut it. But she's like, if I do, you guys will disappear. It's like, most people will want to get rid of the thing that causes them pain and stuff like that. But for Nancy, it's like, the reason why this came about is because she buried her trauma and everything so deep, it allowed the Wraith to kind of like find those vulnerabilities and latch onto them. That's what these cords are. It's connecting to those vulnerabilities. But for her, it's like, I'm gonna do things differently. And she doesn't like cast them aside. She cuts the Wraith away from her, but then she keeps the cords, because it's like, no, like, the fact of the matter is, it may be hard, it may hurt, but the fact is, all of you are a part of me, because our pain, the good and the bad, make us who we are. So yeah, she would rather probably end up forgetting a lot of that, but it's like, a lot of that has made her who she is today, for better and for worse in certain cases. But it's like, it's all of this is a part of me, trauma and all, and finding a way to like to hold on to that and like heal from it all, you know, rather than pushing it down, confronting it and holding on to it, holding on to these different pieces of yourself. And it's like, and they're kind of bound together. And in that moment, she's able to wake up and she's good. And you can tell immediately she's beside Ace, and it's like, oh, she's a little awkward. He's like, yeah, I'm good. And she's like, yeah, it was kind of a team effort. Everyone worked together. So luckily everything kind of worked out on that front. Another aspect to this episode is obviously for George. She doesn't have much time, you know, and because of that whole thing, she is struggling with, like, you know, for her, ever since she kicked the blood bucket, she's always had like she's always felt like, yeah, death has always been chasing me, and she's just like, she wants to just stop, like, always having to worry about it. She wants to just kind of live her life. The fact of the matter is, now she knows, like, definitely her life is getting cut short because of the whole Odette situation. But it's like the fact that she wants to marry Nick, and it's just like, you know, get to see her sisters grow up and what they're capable of. And it's just like, I won't be able to, like, I'll miss out on those moments because of everything, you know? Because she's tired of just being so scared of death that she stops living life, you know? Because to a certain extent, because when Nancy lost her mom, she kind of stopped living life to a certain extent too. You know, so like there's parallels that can be drawn in that. But when it's all said and done, you know, because there was this moment like when they were pretending to, like, Odette and Bess, and for Bess, it was like, this is a fantasy, because we could never be a thing, because this would be in George's body, and there'll always be like a George and Nick, and it's just like, I can't take away from them just to enjoy what I have. And even Odette kind of comes to that same conclusion, where it's like, you know, it's like, George was like, thanks for having our back. It's like, no, she's like, I've kind of grown a little fond of you. I guess she's like, I guess I've become what you might call a helicopter ghost. But for her, it's like, this was her saying goodbye. It's like, you can't separate from me. It's like, yes, but at the very least, I can bury myself deep in your subconscious and never come out. Because the fact is, despite my circumstances, I might not have been able to live my life, but you have the opportunity to live yours. And every time I'm coming out, I'm taking away that opportunity from you. Because I think on some level, she's probably thinking like, right, it's no different from me. I'm already taking your life force away from you just by being inside of your life is already going to get cut short. Why should I take any more, like, especially as someone who couldn't live her life to the fullest, who didn't get to experience love with the person that she loved. Like, it's like, why take that away from another person, especially now that she's actually grown fond of George. So George kind of says, all right, give this note to Bess so you can kind of say your goodbyes. And then Bess opens the note when Odette tells her everything, and it's like, it says kiss her. It's like George giving her permission. It's like, no, kiss her, because you don't want to, like, go, you know, have regret. So it's sad, like, you know, they have such a beautiful moment. And, you know, that ends up being kind of their last moment, you know, and they kind of have to say goodbye after this, you know. So, I mean, is this the last we'll necessarily see of Odette? Who knows? maybe there'll be future things where like she does pop up because she's I don't know, like I'm curious, like are we gonna make this super sad to make it so that George can never actually have a full life, or will it be a situation where maybe they can eventually find some way to separate them, and then we can potentially have like an Odette and Best thing, like you think that'd be like the happiest happy ever after, but we don't know if that's even possible, so there's an angle to that. Obviously Ace and Amanda, he kind of apologizes, and for her it's like, I gotta be here for my brother, like I'm all he has and he's all I have, and he's like, I get that, I'm not making you choose, I'm just saying I'm prioritizing you, can you prioritize me? So sadly Nancy goes to go see Ace, like, yeah, I was in that world and there's kind of a thing between us, but it's like, right, he went on a trip with Amanda, but even he kind of felt it to a certain extent, because he was like, yeah, I just feel like I left something at home, and it's like, oh, yeah, like, once again, you don't want to, like, Amanda to get hurt, because she's not a bad person, she's actually good, her and Ace are actually cute together, but you're like, Nancy, which I was literally thinking, like, what would their ship name, because I was like, AC is, like, the closest I can think of. You probably have to go with their last names and stuff like that. Because using their first name probably wouldn't necessarily work out. But regardless, but it's kind of sad. Like, things didn't kind of work out in that front. But where that story goes, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But also, I'm curious, like, where things are going to go in the Gil front. Like, obviously, he's not in the best place right now, especially if his sister's not around, and maybe that's only going to grow worse. We'll see. But nevertheless. Obviously, George wanting to kind of live her life like Nick, it's like, yeah, like, marry me. And he was like, yeah, sure. And she's like, no, will you marry me? Like, it's like, whoa. So things are gonna move, because for her, it's like, I don't know how much time I necessarily have left, but I don't have a lot. So I need to start living my life, so that's kind of nice. Obviously the conversation to come up earlier in the episode between Ryan and Carson, because it's like, right, is there any way to protect you if Everett ever tried to screw you over, but they're like, oh, well, by announcing, because they said, like, the reason why he would never announce Nancy is his granddaughter, because admitting, like, the whole kidnapping charges, because that would open her up to be in a position where she could basically take over the company. He wouldn't want that. So it's a situation where Ryan could help, but he would have to basically sign over his rights as a parent, give up his rights as a father, as her biological father, and like say like, oh, Carson can legally adopt her and stuff like that. But for Carson, it's like, regardless of anything, you're still her dad and you have rights. So it's kind of like, he didn't want to take, like, even if it meant saving himself, like, if I have to suffer the consequences, so be it. But also, like, I don't want to take away your rights. Like, you are her father. And that's not something that should just be thrown away. It is something that is important. It does matter, And so at the end of the day, Nancy comes home, and obviously Ryan and both Ryan and Carson at the same time, are you okay? And it's just like, oh, there's two of you. And it's like, oh yeah, we're watching this thing. But obviously she's come to the decision. She's like, I'm going to announce to the world that I'm a Hudson. By doing so, I'm going to take over the company. But, the reason why I'm going to do it, I want to break up the company. I want to give reparations to all of Everett's victims. So, and obviously it's like Ryan would have to sign the paper, which he's like, I already did it. She's like, you gave up your rights from beyond. He's like, yeah, but obviously, like, I'm sleeping on the couch, so it's like, you haven't got rid of me that easy. It's like, yeah, Carson, like, yeah, he's gonna be sleeping on the couch for as long as he needs it. So it's kind of neat to have both her dads, and it's like, I think this is a necessary part of, like, healing. And then at the very end, we get the letter, which that was an interesting, like, I thought when she had the blood and everything, I was like, whoa, are we going to find out that she's, like, part of, like, the road back or something like that? And no, like, the moment she got in the bath with the blood, I was like, no, I was like, she's Temperance. It turns out that's the case. I watched something recently, I don't remember what it was, where someone was, I think it was, like, October Faction, where someone was, like, in blood, making themselves younger or whatever, or feeding off the blood like that. I was like, that's fascinating. And then obviously, like, the mausoleum where the Hudsons are buried, like, the Temperance one was cracked. So I'm like, when did she escape? Like, did she escape generations ago? And she's just been there pretending to, like, I don't know. Because it does seem like at one point in time, obviously, because there was talks, like, her daughter Charity stole the device and went off and, like Myrtle is, like, her great niece or something like that. So I'm like, But the question is, like, at what point did Temperance escape? Like, has she been out for a long time? Or was it only recently that she escaped and she pretended to be Myrtle? Did she possess Myrtle by, like, kill Myrtle and then disguise herself as Myrtle? Or, like, because I'm assuming she's been aging this entire time. So she escaped some time ago and has been parading, like, not unless she's been around the entire time just pretending to be the next person in her family type. I don't know. I don't know how that whole thing works. But she got into blood and she revealed herself. It's like, yeah, because she has Nancy's blood. And it's like, oh. And because of that, Nancy is the 7th generation in the Hudson family. Because Bess and George had talked about it earlier in the episode that, like, it needed the barrier is supposed to last 7 generations. So with Nancy's blood, boom, tears down the barrier. That's like, I hope we get to meet soon. Which is bad because obviously she's coming into town. Which is the most, like, it almost felt like a Legacies or like Vampire Diaries or like Originals moment where she came and tore down the barrier. I was like, oh, like obviously the shows had magic before now. Like, we definitely leaned into the supernatural, like more fantasy. Like, this is even going beyond just like supernatural. This is leaning into like some fantasy territory, like I said, the Vampire Diaries universe does. But it felt like a very like Vampire Diaries like moment, like of her tearing that barrier down with Nancy's blood. So it's like, now she's in town, and whatever great evil is buried beneath, she's planning to take control of it. Now, why? Is she just power hungry? What that necessarily be? Who knows? What that evil necessary is. But we also have to think about the fact is, right, there's also, like I brought up, like the road back. That's still something that hasn't been dealt with, especially considering they're the ones who killed Celia, so that's something to be considered. There's also the Everett thing. Like, obviously, like, his trial and everything will probably end up being next season. So what that's going to look like. Is he still going to be a threat to Nancy and everything, especially if Nancy does what she plans on doing? What other, mysteries and cases await them, especially with Temperance in town? Quite the interesting stinger for the season. So I'm really interested to see what's in store, because obviously the show has been renewed for a 3rd season. So I'm so excited to ultimately see like where season 3 takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, light to the force, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.